Hey everyone, we're live talking about the new Blackmagic announcements that happened just a little while ago. So Blackmagic Design did a live stream starting about 2 hours ago, introducing some new products, and I wanted to share my thoughts and my feelings and kind of summarize a lot of the stuff that they talked about. So those announcement videos tend to be kind of long, and wanted to summarize for those who don't want to watch the entire thing. So I'm going to be as brief as I possibly can be, but there was a lot there, and I had a hard time just keeping up taking notes as this one happens. This one had a lot faster pace than a lot of their other announcement videos. Yeah, they announced a lot more products in a short period of time than they traditionally do. So they spent a little bit less time on each product than we typically see from them, but they had a lot to get through. So as mentioned, this is a live stream, so if you happen to be watching live and you have questions, you can leave those in the chat, and I will try and address those as we go, though I may be saving some of those for later towards the end of the video, so that I can keep going with all the announcements. So because this video they shared would just barely happened, I haven't had a ton of time to do a lot of deep research into product specifications and whatnot, so there's going to be some holes in this. So you and I might be going on this adventure together as I go through their website to try and extract some of the details that were not necessarily included as part of the announcement. So anyway, so yeah, they announced a bunch of new products, primarily Hyperdeck recorders and a couple of new cameras. So we're going to focus on most of the discussion on that. So also, there was one other one, which I want to get out of the way here. I am streaming this in 4K here today, but I'm not using the new Web Presenter 4K that they just barely announced. So a few months ago, they announced the Web Presenter HD, and I've had one of those for a little while. In fact, my review for that video actually just went live today, so if you wanted to get more details on that product, that video is here, available on my channel now. I just made that public this morning. But they announced a new version of that, which is the Web Presenter 4K. So let's see here. We'll go here, and you guys are going to see my raw notes here. So I took a few screenshots as we went. So they introduced the new Web Presenter 4K, which is basically the same as their Web Presenter HD, just with 4K capabilities. So it's a cool product. Yeah, I will definitely be picking one of these things up. What I'm using here today instead of that, I noticed some people in the chat were commenting that, hey, you already got one. Well, no, I didn't already get one. I'm streaming in 4K the same way I have done historically, and that's using OBS with a Blackmagic DeckLink 8K Pro capture card. So I don't have to get one of the Web Presenter 4Ks in order to stream 4K. I'm already doing that, but this will certainly make it easier, and I don't have to tie up a computer in order to do the 4K streaming any longer. But yeah, basically it's the same product as the Web Presenter HD. It just has 4K capabilities. So that's supposed to be available now-ish with Blackmagic. Whenever they say available now, take that with a grain of salt. That means they're starting to ship a handful to their dealers, but it's going to be a while before you're able to get some in your hands. And speaking of which, if you want to be able to get one relatively quickly, try and buy from the smaller dealers. They tend to have a better track record of getting new products in stock quickly, better than like the big ones, B&H, Adorama, etc. So if you want one of these things right away, go to one of the smaller ones. And like the one that I recommend here in the United States is DVE Store. We try to send a lot of traffic their way. They're a great company, and they tend to get these things in stock fairly quickly. But that's going to be true across the world for most of the smaller dealers. If you want these products quickly, place your pre-order as soon as you possibly can with one of the smaller dealers, and then you'll be one of the first to get it. If you wait until you see something in stock at one of the big retailers, BH Photo or whatever, you're going to be waiting a while. So if you want to be the first to get something, start with your small dealers first. You'll have a lot better luck there. All right, so Web Presenter 4K, basically the same as the Web Presenter HD, just 4K, $695, available now-ish. It does have 4K output on the webcam for the USB-C connection. Will output 4K as well. Not that there's a lot of software that you can actually use that with, but it's there if you need it. The other thing it can do is it will actually upconvert sources to 4K. So you can. The reason for that is so that you have a consistent resolution output. So if you started out with a 4K source and then you have to switch to an HD source, you don't want your stream to actually suddenly switch resolutions. And so you start streaming in 4K, then you switch to your HD source, it upconverts to 4K, and then sends that out. So it's there so that you're not having to interrupt your signal. So if you have some content in 4K and some in HD, you'll be able to switch back and forth freely on the source and still have the 4K output consistently throughout the course of your entire video. So that's also true of the Web Presenter HD. It does the same thing as well. You set the output to a very specific format, and it will up or down convert as needed there as well. So anyway, available nowish. We'll see. We'll see. I will probably be getting one of these as soon as I possibly can. I actually have a lot of use for this. If you watch my review video about the HD version, one of the things I mentioned is that one of the things I didn't like about it is they didn't support 4K, and now they do. So we actually have a 4K version of that product shipping. The bulk of their video was focused on new Hyperdeck Studio recorders, and they introduced, what was it, 5 new models, I think? Is that right? I think so. Yeah. So traditionally they've had their full one rack size Hyperdeck Studio products, 1 rack unit, and then they've had their Hyperdeck Studio Mini, which are 1/3 of a rack, and that's kind of where they've been for a while now. I don't think the new product has come out in that line for about 4 years. So, yeah, they've completely revamped the entire lineup. I think I heard Grant say that they're continuing to sell the Hyperdeck Studio Mini. I'm going to keep saying that for some reason. I think they're going to keep selling the Hyperdeck Studio Mini, but they're introducing several new models as well. So let's actually take a look at some of those products. So, all right. So the first one they announced is called the Hyperdeck Studio HD Mini. So it's very much like the prior Hyperdeck Studio Mini. It's just limited to high definition resolutions. It doesn't do 4K 2430 like the Hyperdeck Studio Mini does. They also changed some of the connections on it. If we look at the back here, it has the traditional SDI in and SDI out, and HDMI out, and reference in and out like the old ones did. But they've added timecode in and out. They've added an external disk connection on USB-C. They've added a 12-volt DC input, so you can power it off of 12 volts. And they did remove one thing, and that's the separate A and B outputs on SDI. With the previous version, you could do separate fill and key for high definition on 2 separate SDI outputs. The A output would output your fill, and the B output would output the key. If you had a 4444 video source that had transparency in it, you could use those for doing high-quality alpha channel overlays on your video. And I've done videos about that here on my channel, so you can go back and look at my videos here in order to get more details on how that works. But they've since removed that on this model. This is considered a lower-end model. They basically just made a more affordable version of it, and then removed a couple of features, and then removed the 4K support. So this is meant to be a lower price entry into the market. So timecode in and out, which allows you to sync multiple decks so that they're frame accurate. So if you wanted to do multiple displays that are synchronized, so you got a wall of monitors or whatever, and you wanted to have multiple players playing video for those monitors simultaneously, the timecode allows you to make sure that they're all playing the same frame at the same time, and then the reference makes sure that the timing of those frames, you can link the reference in on one deck to the reference out on another deck, and that will make sure that the frames, individual frames, are in sync as well. So yeah, the timecode jacks are new. They have not had those on their products before. It's for those who are not familiar with it, timecode is just basically, it's actually an audio signal, which basically just tells what frame number you're currently on. It doesn't synchronize the start and stop of a frame. It just tells, right now I'm on frame 73 or whatever. Actually, well, you get the idea. But that's also what timecode does. And having timecode linked between these recorders allows you to make sure that all the recorders are playing back the same frame at the same time. And then the reference in and out, if you link those, allows you to make sure that the start of each frame is happening at the same time, so that you don't have any mismatch in the timing from one recorder to another. All right. These support ProRes, DNX HD, and MPEG-4, just like the other ones. They also support PCM and AAC on audio. That was also available on the Hyperdeck Studio Mini with one of the later firmware upgrades. They also are explicitly supporting interlace video, which I've never tried it, but I guess they didn't really support fully previously. I don't shoot interlace. I make a policy of never shooting interlace, so I've never actually tried that myself, but apparently the new one actually supports interlace video properly. They have 13 languages available. That's, I think, two more than they've had in the past. They've also added a dark mode on the menus, so they call it the dark appearance and then the light appearance. The light appearance is the one we've traditionally seen. The dark appearance now has a black background instead of a white background in the menu. So yeah. Pricing on that is $495, so $200 cheaper than the Hyperdeck Studio Mini, and that should be available now-ish. Again, get your orders in now if you actually want one of these things. The next product that they announced was Hyperdeck Studio HD Plus. So this is meant to kind of be a replacement / upgrade for the prior Hyperdeck Studio Mini. Instead of being a 1/3 rack width, it's actually a half rack width, so you can get 2 units side by side rather than what we've been able to do 3 in the past. So, but they've actually been able to utilize that extra panel space on the front panel and on the back panel for additional buttons and controls, and then additional inputs and outputs on the back. So if we take a look at this, we've got bigger transport controls, like these are full-size buttons instead of the smaller buttons that are on the Hyperdeck Studio Mini and the new HD. And you get a search button, and then these actually have speakers built in. So if you wanted to be able to just do a quick check on what audio the device is recording, you can press that speaker button, press and hold to listen, or double tap to latch it in place. And then the little hole next to that is for the speaker itself. But it's nice having dedicated buttons for all the like being able to choose the input on these, and you'll see why that makes a difference here in a minute. One of the things that they've added on this compared to the others, they've actually added an HDMI input. So this is the only model, the first model below $1,000 in the Hyperdeck Studio series, besides the, I forget what they call it, the shuttle, that actually has an HDMI input. So if you need to be able to record from like an ATEM Mini, this is going to be an easier way to do that. It's like before you would have had to convert from HDMI to SDI to go into the Hyperdeck Studio Mini. But now you actually have a dedicated HDMI input on these. So yeah, just a direct connection from your switcher into your recorder if you wanted to do that. It also adds the timecode in and out, like we mentioned, like we saw before. This one does have the separate A and B outputs on it, so you can do separate fill and key. It has a proper SDI loop output. Woohoo! That's something I asked for when I did my review of these products. It's nice to be able to daisy chain from one to the next. So if you have a bank of recorders and you want to record the same thing on multiple cards at the same time, having a loop out is really, really nice. I also added, this is very cool, a monitor output. So this allows you to see an on-screen display. In fact, I got a screenshot of that a little bit further down here. There we go. Yeah, so you actually have overlays on top of your video, so you can see better what's going on. So you see a full resolution version of what you're recording, plus an additional overlay to see the status. So that's something that's new. It's something we were hoping they were going to add to the original Hyperdeck Studios, but they never did, even though they had dedicated monitor outputs, and something that's not available on the new, I'm going to forget the name of this thing over and over, the Hyperdeck Studio HD Mini. That does not have the monitor outputs, just like the Hyperdeck Studio Mini didn't either. But so yeah, and also I forgot to mention this on. I think they added it on the. Yes, so on both of these models, the HD Mini as well as the HD Plus, they do have USB-C connections, so you can do recording on external SSDs. So if you got an SSD that uses USB-C, plug that in, and that's nice because it's a lot easier to get high-capacity drives in USB-C than it is in SD cards. So if you want to be able to do a drive that's 1 or 2 terabytes, you can do that. You can plug that in here, and it's much cheaper than getting 1 or 2 terabyte SD cards, which happen to be tremendously expensive. So yeah, but both of those devices allow you to record using an external disk over USB-C. I should also mention that this one includes a 12-volt input, so you're able to power off of two power sources, so you get some level of redundancy. You can use your typical IEC power cord through the traditional power input, but it also has a 12-volt input there for backup, or if you want to power it primarily off of that. Like here in my trailer, I've got 12-volt power everywhere and gobs of it. So I could certainly power the devices off a 12-volt there. So it supports, even though they call it HD Plus, it actually does do 4K at up to 30 frames per second. So there are some limitations in terms of which formats you can record. I think they said something about not being able to do H.264 in 4K. But yeah, this new one will do 4K 30. So in reality, this really is an upgrade / replacement to the the Hyperdeck Studio Mini that we've had for the last several years. So that one would do 4K, but not in H.264. So there's a lot of similarities between the two products. They're also introducing something new that they call H.264 SDI. It's a variation of H.264 or MPEG-4 that records in 10-bit rather than the traditional 8-bit. So normal H.264 files can only do 8-bit video, but they're introducing this new format which can do 10-bit in 422. Although they advise testing your existing editing software or whatever to make sure that it actually does work, because that's not really an official standard and it's something that you're going to find traditional support for. So yeah. Okay, so yeah, HDMI input, external disc, remote in and out. Oh, that's the other thing. So this one actually has a remote output as well. So that's a 9-pin connection that's basically a serial connection. It's been used for decades and decades, universal standard there. And what you can do with that is chain from one deck to another, so you can set it up where you hit record on one, it automatically records on all the others, or you hit play on one, it automatically starts playback on all the others. So whatever you're doing on the transport controls on one is sent out that remote out, and then you can chain that into another recorder. And if you've got that, the reference and the time code all linked, then you know you're absolutely frame accurate, and you're only having to press one button to start multiple recorders simultaneously. So that's something that's new. They haven't put on some of their previous products. So yeah, let's see. Yeah, the monitor output, built-in speaker with adjustable volume. It also has a headphone output on there as well. So scroll up. Where they go? Yeah, there we go. So you can plug in headphones and be able to hear the audio that's being recorded on those decks there. So nice little upgrade. Pricing on that one. Let's see if I can find that. Where did I put that? I know I wrote it down. Got lots of pictures here. $695. So the same price as the Hyperdeck Studio Mini from before. So yeah, if they're making both available, then the only real reason to get the other one is if you want 3 in one rack space, or because this new one adds a lot of additional functionality at basically the same price. They're also adding something that's kind of interesting. So they're adding what they call a resync feature in an upcoming firmware upgrade. They said it might be available today, might be a while later. We'll see. But basically, this allows you to use these decks as timecode generators. So if you wanted to sync multiple cameras instead of getting a separate timecode generator, sync generator, then you can actually use these devices in order to do that. So kind of an interesting thing there. So in that case, your recorder is driving your camera in order to make sure that your frames are in sync with one another. So interesting, yeah. I thought that was kind of a interesting announcement on their part. Not something that I would have anticipated. So most people that are in environments where you have reference inputs on your camera, so Genlock or a tri-level sync or whatever, already have a timecode generator, a sync generator. So this is not necessarily something that I would consider to be super accurate. So, or super useful. I mean. All right. Next thing I wanted to go over here is the new Hyperdeck Studio HD Pro. So this is their first replacement for their old one rack space recorder. So that's what it looks like. By its name, it does record HD only. It does not do 4K, but it records on 2 SSDs and or 2 SD cards and or USB-C connected drives. So just basically a big refresh of the prior Hyperdeck Studio products that they've had for a while. Yeah, so it's nice. Sometimes it's nice to have be able to record in SSDs because they tend to be a lot higher capacity than some of the other recording media that are out there, and you're also almost always guaranteed that they're faster, so it's easier to copy footage off of those than it would be with SD cards or whatever. But you have the option. You can do SD and or SSD and or USB-C all in one device. Let me scroll down a little bit more here. You can see there's the rear panel. So HDMI in and out, SDI in and out, dual SDI outputs A and B, so you can do separate fill and key. It has the remote in and out, so you can change from one to another. It has the monitor output, so you can see the status display screen. Time code, but these are on XLRs rather than BNCs. It's the same signal, but it's on a different connector, and it's a different impedance, so you actually do need an adapter to go from one to the other, but those are easy to pick up. I've got a bunch of those from a company called Sescom, SESCOM. I use those for my studio converters that I have here in my trailer to convert from the XLR AES audio I have coming out of my intercom going into my studio converters, which have BNC. So anyway, you can freely convert from one to the other. Very, very easy to do. And it's remote in and out, Ethernet, 12 volt, as well as a single IEC. So, but again, this is HD only. So if you wanted to go 4K, you step up to the next model, which I'll cover more in a second. No audio inputs. I happen to notice that some of their older Hyperdeck Studio Pro did have audio inputs and outputs on XLRs, which I use all the time, so I'm going to miss that. It also had RCAs, which this one does not. So the only way to get audio in and out of this is on either the SDI or HDMI ports. There's no separate audio connections there. The shuttle knob, this guy right here, it's kind of interesting that he bragged about that quite a bit. It's a metal knob that has coating on the output, or on the outside of it, and it's electronically controlled, and so it has a clutch that allows them to place stops so you can't turn it a certain distance. They also allows them to do software-based detents. So when you're shuttling, you can know when you're basically at the stop position, so the middle position. So you can actually get some tactile feedback so you can feel the position of the knob, and then it clicks as you're rotating it. So some interesting technology going on there. I think they've done another product with that, maybe their Hyperdeck 8K. I can't remember, but yeah. So it's interesting they're putting that at this level. All right, so. Okay, so there's HD and then 4K 30. It's $9.95 and again available nowish. So starting to ship to dealers right now is basically what that means. So, but they've completely replaced the other full one rack unit Hyperdeck Studio models with this one. So next one they announced was the Hyperdeck Studio 4K Pro, which, as its name would suggest, does 4K, in this case up to 60 frames per second. It also adds some other cool features. It has redundant AC power, so you see 2 power inputs in addition to the 12-volt power input. So in that case, you actually have 3 sources of power on this, so for a lot of additional redundancy. The Ethernet connection on this one is 10 gigs, so you can transfer files to and from the device much faster than you can with the others, which only have 1 gig. Other than that, the connections are basically identical to the other one. The one thing that this adds, and one of the big things this adds over the HD version, is it adds H.265 functionality, so you can record in a much higher efficiency video codec than the H.264 and the others. And whenever you're recording in Ultra HD or 4K, it will record in H.265, and then H.264 is available in 1080. And there's some confusion there as whether you can do H.264 in 4K or not. I'm gonna have to do some more research on that one, but it seemed like when you're in 4K, it defaults to H.265, and then when you're HD, it defaults to H.264. This one will actually do separate fill and key up to 2160p at 60 frames per second, which traditionally with their other products, whenever you separate your fill and key, your bandwidth for video gets cut in half. So like with the Hyperdeck Studio Mini, even though it will play back and record 4K, if you need a separate fill and key, you're limited to 1080p at 60 frames per second. So instead of 6 gig SDI, it becomes 2 separate 3 gig SDI outputs on that. But this one will actually do fill and key at up to 2160p at 60 frames per second. The other thing that they're bragging about here, and this is actually pretty cool, this is capable of playing video files in H.264 or .265 that are rendered on computers. That with Hyperdeck products has traditionally not been the case. So if you wanted to produce an H.264 video on the computer and play back in the Hyperdeck, you couldn't. The format was different enough that it wouldn't play. But on this one, on this model, they're adding that capability, being able to handle files generated on a computer for playback on these devices, which is going to be pretty nice. Because traditionally, what we've had to do is render in ProRes or DNx HD on a computer if we want to be able to play back on their Hyperdeck Studio products. All right, pricing on that one is $14.95. So that's actually a fairly drastic reduction because their old Studio Pro was $2,000 in 1995. So this one's a little bit cheaper. So $14.95, and again, available now-ish. So, yeah, get your order in if you want one. All right, and then they turned their focus at this point to cameras, and they've introduced 2 new models of camera. So the first one is called the Studio Camera 4K Pro. It's basically, these basically replace their older studio camera products, which, good thing. Those things, I didn't really particularly care for those. So the new one's 4K Pro. As my name would suggest, it shoots in 4K. It uses a micro four thirds lens mount, the same as they've been doing. Has audio ins, has a dedicated 5-pin headset jack on it. So professional headsets, like, I don't know if you can see that there. But yeah, professional broadcast headsets will now work with this. It's something they've added those. There has a carbon fiber body. Has much better low light performance. At least that's their claim. And they did do a demonstration. So there we go. They lit the set using candles and let us see if that was. It's much better than the previous. That's been a real weakness in the Blackmagic camera lineup for a while now. Is the low light performance. I'm glad they're finally addressing that quite a bit. But they're sticking with micro four thirds, which I think is very interesting because the selection of lenses available for micro four thirds for broadcast use is pretty low, pretty limited. There are very few electronic zoom lenses that are out there, and generally across the board, most of the lenses that are micro four thirds are just not that great. So I find it rather interesting they're doubling down on micro four thirds. A lot of the rest of the industry is moving away from that. Like Olympus is completely pulled out of the industry entirely, and they're not producing products any longer. New products any longer. Panasonic is about the only camera manufacturer left that's really doing micro four thirds. So I find it very interesting that Blackmagic is introducing new cameras at this point that are actually using micro four thirds when most of the industry is kind of saying, oh, we're done. I would have much rather seen something in a 2/3 inch mount, a B4 mount instead of micro four thirds. But it is what it is, right? So yeah. So there's the new Studio Camera 4K Pro. Talk about some of the other interesting things about it. Up to 36 decibels of gain, which that's nice. Integrated tally, so the light on top is included. SDI, HDMI, and Ethernet. Ethernet we'll get to more here in a minute, and then it has a USB-C connection for connecting separate recorders, so you can record on SSDs over USB-C. And if you do that, you're able to get Blackmagic RAW. I didn't see any mention of H.264, so I'm not sure if it'll be H.264 on USB-C or not, but being able to do Blackmagic RAW is actually pretty nice. In addition to the 5-pin XLR headset connection, it still has the 1/8 inch headset connection, like you find people use with their phones and whatnot, or gaming headsets, like the HyperX Cloud Stinger that I use with my Blackmagic camera converters. That would work just fine on these. It has a tripod mount with a plate included as part of the camera, so you don't have to buy that separately. It also has, you can see down here at the bottom, it has a place to put some 15mm rails in there. So if you need to support a heavy lens or a teleprompter or anything else on the front of the camera, you actually have a proper place to do that. You know that's going to be secure and it's going to be strong enough. So that's something that's new on there. It has a 7-inch touchscreen on the back, which I find it interesting that they're doing touch because it also includes a built-in sunshade, which flips out. Let's see if we got a good picture. There you go. So the sunshade flips out and shades it from the sun, just like the name would suggest. But I would think that would also make it very difficult to do the touchscreen functionality because like your hand's going to be blocked when you're reaching in there. The sunshade is removable, but if you're shooting outside, you're going to want that. And if you're having to use the touchscreen to configure the camera with the sunshade in place, I think that's going to be probably a little bit awkward. So I don't know that having a touchscreen on this product necessarily makes a ton of sense, but they were pretty big on that. You can see that it has knobs for adjusting brightness, contrast, and peaking. For those who are wondering, peaking is basically a marker, a set of markers or whatever that you can put on screen to indicate which portions of the image are in focus. So in this case, you turn that knob up, and all of a sudden everything that's in focus on the screen gets red outline or red dots on top of it. And so you can really see if your image is in sharp focus or not. So it's a feature we find on a lot of professional cameras. It's something I like to use quite a bit. So. All right, touch interface. They also have presets, but I think maybe a first for them, where you're able to configure the camera and save all of the settings as a preset, which then allows you to copy that to other cameras. That way you can make sure that all your cameras match exactly. It's something I use a lot on my Sony cameras. Like when we're doing live events with my Sony cameras, we'll set up one camera with exactly the settings that we want. So we set the frame rate, the resolution, all the color settings, your white balance, your gain, ISO, everything. We set that all on one camera and then save that to an SD card, which would then move to the other cameras and then load that in. That way we know that all the cameras are set up exactly the same. And they're doing that same thing here as well. So you mentioned that you could actually copy the presets from one machine or one camera to another. So I assume that's over USB-C because it doesn't have any other external connections that you could use for that. So yeah, that's kind of a cool feature to have. The camera also has built-in LUT support, so you're able to load 3D LUTs standard, as well as DaVinci Resolve specific color profiles as well. So there's that. The pricing on that is $1,795. So I think that's pretty much in line with where the camera previously was, but it does include more stuff than the old one did. So good deal for what it is. I noticed that one of the things that they omitted from this, which I thought was kind of sad, is that they removed the optical fiber connection that they had on the previous ones, which was actually very handy. It's like you're sending all your signals over a single fiber, and they've removed that from this one. What they've done to replace that instead, let's see if I get to that. I'll get to these things here in a minute. But what they've done is they've replaced that with Ethernet, and they have this new device. They call it Studio Converter. So this makes the third product that I'm aware of that they have. Now, fourth product that I'm aware of that they have that's actually called the Studio Converter. But this provides all your data and power for your cameras. So we'll flip this thing around here. All right, so you've got your camera outputs. So 2 SDI connections with the video coming from camera, and then you've got 2 return feeds. So you can show program, as well as if you wanted to run a teleprompter off the HDMI output of the camera, you can do that using the second return feed. It has a monitor output. They didn't really demonstrate that, but basically I assume that's just the video source coming from camera. Timecode in and out, so you can synchronize timecode with other devices, your reference connections. And then over here on the right, the PoE++ provides 90 watts of power over an Ethernet connection, Cat6a or better, to the camera. So instead of running fiber to camera, you run Ethernet. However, the big limitation with that is distance. So Ethernet, even at this level, breaks down in less than 100 meters, whereas fiber you can go a lot farther. So this is not going to be useful for me, for example. It's like my fiber trunk cable that I have coming out of my trailer alone is 150 meters, and then we typically have 20 to 100 or maybe even 200 meters of cable run past that. And so I would long be exceeding the distance limitations of Ethernet. Whereas fiber, you can run basically as long as you want. So I thought that was rather interesting that they're doing that. It uses Ethernet for getting camera control data from the Hyperdeck, from the ATEM switchers. So, yeah, that product is not going to be available right away. It's going to be October before that actually starts shipping, and that's $895. So, interesting product, but I think they kind of missed the boat a little bit by switching from fiber to Ethernet. It's kind of, in my opinion, kind of a step backwards. We're not really 100% sure what protocol it's sending over Ethernet. I need to dig into their website a little bit more in order to find out for sure. There's some speculation that it's TCO, because that's what they've used with some of their other products in the past, which is IP-based. But it might not. What they're using might not be IP-based at all. We don't know yet. So we're kind of holding out to find out what that is. If it's IP-based, you'd be able to route that on Ethernet network, but at the same time, 10 gigabit, you'd be saturating most of the Ethernet connections, Ethernet networks that are out there anyway. So it's better to run a dedicated connection, because I'm not sure there's any real benefit to putting this on an existing network other than being able to reutilize existing infrastructure. So we'll see. We just don't know yet. All right. The other thing that they announced Well, let's see. Yeah, we'll get to this. So this is a new Blackmagic Studio Camera 4K Plus. So this is a step down from the 4K Pro that we just looked at. This one's really targeted people who are using the ATEM minis. So if we scroll down a little bit here, we'll see that it only has an HDMI output, so there's no Ethernet, there's no fiber, there's no SDI even. So the only output on this one is HDMI, which means it really is going to be targeted to people who are using the ATEM mini products, because most of their other switchers are SDI based. So essentially, most of the specs about this camera are similar to the 4K Pro, but obviously missing a lot of connectivity. You lose the audio inputs, you lose the broadcast headset connection. You do have a headset connection through the 1/8 inch, but at the same time, the ATEM Mini doesn't support that, so I'm not sure what you'd be using that for. It's HDMI, again, HDMI only. It's pricing on that is going to be $12.95, and again, available now-ish. So I'm going to get to more my thoughts on that one here more in a minute. But before I move on too much, I want to show a couple of the other things, products they announced. So they announced a couple of controls. So Blackmagic Focus Demand. So this is a USB-C device. It uses USB-C to connect to these new cameras and allow you to control focus on electronically controlled focus lenses, the micro four thirds lenses you put on these cameras. So this gives you a tactile way to adjust the focus on cameras. This is much better than trying to reach up and control it on the camera. So this is what professional cameras actually use, is something like this. And this is interesting that they're making this available at this level. They also have a zoom demand, which is the same thing but for zoom. So you've got a rocker. You can move back and forth in order to zoom in and out. It also has several buttons on it that can be programmed to do different functions. But again, this is very similar to what professionals use on high-end broadcast cameras for doing zoom. The interesting thing about this is there are very, very few micro four thirds lenses out there that actually have electronic zoom, and even fewer that have variable speed electronic zoom. So yeah, I'm really wondering what they're doing with this. The market just isn't such that I think this is going to be a product that's much in demand, just because there are so few lenses that will work with this in a way that's actually useful. So maybe they know something I don't, but it was very interesting choices on their part. I would have thought that B4 would have been a much better mount and sensor size at 1/3 or 2/3 to go with on this. So anyway, so the focus demand and the zoom demand are going to be $245 each, and those are going to be available later, I think October-ish, if I remember right. So, all right, so that kind of covers the product announcements that they had today. At this point, I'm going to jump into the chat and see what people are saying there. So, alrighty. Nice that you can stream 4K. Well, I can barely watch 1080p. Well, that's not atypical. There's a lot of people in the world who barely have access to 1080p. So, yes, it's nice that I can stream 4K, and I'm very grateful for that. And I'm grateful that I not only have the bandwidth to do so, but also have the equipment to do so. But yeah, that's kind of where the future is going. If we're going to be seeing 4K adopted more and more for live streaming. So, if you're looking to the future and you want to make sure you're future-proofing yourself and your business, 4K is going to be the way to go if you possibly can. So, okay, let's see. Just watching the event. I don't have to now. Doug will tell me what's good and bad. Yeah, that's kind of. I have a lot of people who watch these videos specifically for my quick summary and my opinions on things. So I got through the summary of the announcements in 40 minutes, whereas their video was an hour and a half. So yeah. Neil, Doug has 1 gig up and down, so 4K won't even be noticeable on his connection. Exactly. Yeah, I mean, I could run so many 4K videos, 4K streams on here. I found out that I didn't know this before, but Grant mentioned in the video that YouTube recommends when you're doing 4K streaming that you stream at 30 megabits per second. I'm doing 25, so close enough. All right. So 4K only needs 50 it's megabits per second max, right? Well, you can adjust it. So, yeah. If you want higher quality, you can go with higher bit rate. I wouldn't do 4K at anything less than 12 megabits. So, yeah. I think Doug uploads at 6 megabits per second. When I'm streaming HD, I'll do 6. When I'm doing 4K, I would do 20 plus. So, yeah. Looking forward to Doug's thoughts on the updated studio camera. Okay, so I kind of shared a lot of it, but honestly, I really think these products are kind of misplaced. I'm glad they finally addressed the low light issue, because none of their cameras in the past have been great in low light, other than the cinema cameras. All their live cameras, studio cameras, have not been good in low light. I'm glad they finally addressed that, but again, I think sticking with Micro Four Thirds is kind of shooting themselves in the foot. There are so few Micro Four Thirds lenses that are out there that are meant for broadcast use, and then when you adapt from other systems, you have cropping or other issues. You know, for example, putting a B4 lens on there, the image is smaller than the sensor, so you can't really use it. You'd have to do something like Metabone's speed booster kind of thing, and they probably exist, but I've never actually seen one. So it's very interesting to me that they're sticking with Micro Four Thirds. So, yeah. Okay, does dedicated PC have better encoding capacity than a web presenter? In my use case, a higher frame rate videos and video games. Maybe, but when you have dedicated hardware, it's purpose built, it runs much more efficiently. It's able to run cooler using less power. It's going to be more stable. You don't have to worry about a piece of software that's going to crash on you, or something else running on the computer. You know, you generally don't want to have a computer starting to install updates in the background while you're doing a live stream or whatever. So most of the time, having a dedicated hardware encoder is going to be a better choice than using software. A lot of people do use software, and it works fine for them. I like having dedicated hardware better. The only reason I'm using OBS right now is because I haven't had a way to encode video in 4K previously. So, but when I get the new Hyperdeck, when I get the new Web Presenter 4K, then I will have the ability to do 4K. So, yeah. So, and you guys corrected me. It was 4 new models on the Hyperdeck. So, yeah, so thank you. Let's see. 4K Web Presenter looks good. Only need a converter for HDMI. So yes, the Web Presenter products only have SDI inputs, no HDMI. So if you want to take an HDMI video source like an ATEM Mini, you'll need an HDMI to SDI converter, or coming from a computer or whatever. So, yeah. Hi, Paul. Hi from set. Paul's shooting on set today. It's cool that he dropped in to say hi. So. Web Presenter also has monitor out, but it's HDMI. It actually has monitor output for both SDI and HDMI as well. So if I was feeling more adventurous, I'd grab my Web Presenter right there and show you. But it does have both. So, all right. Lots of people saying hi. So we got a hi from Germany and a hi from Australia. There's one from the UK earlier. So yes, thank you. Could you set up macro on ATEM switcher to trigger recording on this device? Good question. I presume so. Yeah, I think so. I think you can. I think the macro capabilities of the ATEM would allow you to trigger recording. So I'm pretty sure you can. So, and people talking about penguins and kangaroos. Nice. So, all right. Considering instant replays with a recorder like that, so the Hyperdecks, how fast are you at the end of a longer file? Is there a quick way to skip to the last 10 or 15 seconds in a file? Not easily from the front panel, I don't think, but if you had a piece of software that was dedicated for that purpose, you could do it. These Hyperdecks all have the RS-422 remote input on them, so if you were to get a separate controller that's meant for that, you could do that. So, yeah. All right, SportFlow. The studio camera with 4/3 sensor is a huge error. Yeah, I think so too. I think that's very short-sighted. And again, I've mentioned that several times. Needs a 2/3 mount. Exactly. I find it kind of funny, but Grant was trying to tout the advantages of being able to use photo lenses, which are less expensive than broadcast lenses for sure, but they have a lot of limitations. And should probably do a full video on that at some point. But first of all, with photo lenses, you don't have electronic zoom, so you're not going to be able to zoom during a shot. Like you physically grab a ring and turn it. But also, they tend to have issues with focus breathing, so as you're focusing, it zooms in and out a little bit. And they also have a very short throw for the focus ring as well, so it's very hard to get critical focus on one of those. Like just a small movement of the focus ring can actually adjust the focus by quite a bit. So, yeah. No parfocal lenses. That's not entirely true. There are some parfocal lenses in the photo world, but that's certainly not a priority for my photo manufacturers when they're making lenses for photography cameras. So, yeah. All right, see what else. And maybe Blackmagic will make lenses too in the future. We'll see. We don't know. I kind of doubt it. Lens manufacturing takes a lot of knowledge of optics. It takes a long time to come up to speed on that, and it's not a very high margin business. So, yeah. All right. Too bad there are no new switchers. Yeah, that's certainly true. There's a lot of us who are waiting for new switchers that, on the higher end, that adopt some of the features in the A10 minis. It's kind of funny that their lower end switchers in the A10 mini line do some things that their higher end ones don't. It's kind of disappointing for those of us who would like to be able to take advantage of some of those features. Like, for example, scaling on all of our inputs. My ATEM 2ME broadcast or production studio switcher here does not have scaling on all the inputs. So, you think they saved that to October in the big broadcast mess, NAB? We'll see. It's tough to say. I mean, I have no inside information one way or the other on that. I would hope that by October we're actually going to see some new switcher announcements, but yeah, who knows? That could really go either way. This camera is honestly so confusing, so many odd decisions. That's exactly what I thought as they were making an announcement. It's like, who are they targeting with this? People who are really going to be doing professional broadcast are not going to be interested in this because of the Micro Four Thirds, and people who are running A10 minis and want to run inexpensive cameras are not going to want to spend the $1,300 for the camera plus many hundreds more for lenses as well. So I don't really know who they're trying to target with these products. So, yeah. Let's see. Studio camera with only HDMI. Yeah, exactly. 3 cameras, a maximum of 5 meters. That's one of the big issues with these. HDMI, I wouldn't run HDMI more than 2-3 meters if I could possibly get away with it. It just gets so unreliable. You can convert to SDI back and forth. And in fact, I saw a question about that earlier. I just didn't show it. Like, you could extend the distance by converting to SDI by using a pair of their bidirectional 3G converters. But weird, yeah. It's just weird choice. It doesn't. Optical HDMI, that may be a possibility. Those cables tend to be kind of fragile though, so I don't think they would want to be using those in a broadcast environment where they're going to be getting stepped on and having carts and other things rolled over the top of them. So, yeah, and interesting choices there. Any studio camera recording on camera? Yes, they record at least in RAW. Maybe other formats as well. We just don't know yet. I can actually research that here in a second and see if we'll know. Why no NDI? Well, Blackmagic has never supported NDI, and I don't know that they will. There are some licensing costs associated with NDI, and I don't know if they want to pay those, bump the prices of their products a little bit in order to include that. Also, that adds additional hardware to encode and or decode from NDI. So, yeah. 10 gigabit Ethernet cable will get you 20 meters. Yeah. So, yeah, traditionally, like 1 gig Ethernet, you can get 100 meters. 10 gig, 20 meters. Yeah. So, I guess with Ethernet, you choose a media converter that convert between Ethernet and fiber. Yes, you could, but the more you're adding additional boxes into your signal chain, the more points you have of failure, the more likely there is to be issue. somewhere. So additional places that things can fail. And studio cameras are not meant to record in camera. Well, they actually do. So yeah, they record it in RAW, which is again a weird choice, strange choice. Yeah, you can record SSD using the USB-C connections on those. So please take networking from live productions. It only brings problems. So yeah, Ethernet networks are generally pretty reliable, but when you start trying to push high bandwidth video across an existing Ethernet network, you're gonna run into some problems. So Blackmagic is ruling the broadcast market, but too many odd decisions today. Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking with the cameras. I think the recorders are really, really nice, but I think these cameras, I think they're just a little bit, they're focusing on the wrong thing. So going with fiber, going with what was I gonna say? Forget now. But yeah, going with micro four thirds. Yeah, that's a really strange thing. So you won't see NDI in high-end broadcast facilities. That is true. You will find that in any sort of live broadcast environment, they're not using NDI. It has some potential reliability issues at scale. And for small productions, it can work fine, but when you start to scale it out, it doesn't necessarily work super well. The price of the web presenter is crazy. Yeah, it's being able to stream 4K in hardware for, was it $695? That's pretty incredible. So yeah, B4 is much more expensive than the micro four thirds. You can see they're certainly catering to the small studio market. Well, they are. There's no question about that. But having a removable lens camera kind of puts you in a higher bracket than just using small camcorders anyway. So yeah, the big problem with micro four thirds is just the lack of suitable lenses. There's quite a few lenses out there for shooting pictures, but almost no lenses that are meant for video or film or whatever you want to choose. Which lens do you recommend for using these controls? I don't know. I mean, I'm not aware of any lens that would work well with this. I have one of the powered zoom lenses from Olympus on my overhead top-down camera, but it's not very good, and it only has one zoom speed. So I wouldn't recommend it. So how does the 4K Pro compare to the Blackmagic Cinema Camera 4K? Because the new 4K replace it. Use a cinema camera with broadcast capability. Well, they're really different animals. I mean, the pocket cinema cameras are meant for a film-style workflow, so where you say it's time to set up the shot. You know exactly where your actors are going to be, so they're hitting marks, and so it's easy to control focus as people move around or whatever. In a live environment, you don't have that advantage. You don't know where people are going to be. You can't plan your focus moves ahead of time. In cinema workflow, you typically don't find people doing zooming, but in live production, you do. So it's nice to have a camera that supports that, but the pocket cinema cameras do not. So in a broadcast environment, these new cameras would work better than a pocket cinema camera, but the lack of suitable lenses really kind of shoots them in the foot. So IP-based is the future, no doubts. Yes, but the problem we're running into is that video produces so much data so quickly that it's hard to deal with all of it. One camera, in this case of this camera, one 4K camera is producing 10 gigabits of data per second. There aren't very many network switches out there that can handle more than that. And then how do you get it into a switcher? You'd have to have separate connections, separate Ethernet connections for every single camera, which we're doing with SDI, and SDI is far easier to implement, and it's not compressed. NDI and other IP-based protocols they are compressing the video, which one reduces quality and two adds latency into there. So, if we had 100 gigabit connections, then there's maybe some options there for IP to really fully replace SDI. But yeah, and so IP has a lot of advantages, but we don't have the bandwidth with our current networking equipment in order to be able to handle all of the data that we're generating in a video production environment. For example, I'm shooting 4K here, so that's 6 gigabits per second right there for one camera. You start to add multiple cameras, that adds up really, really fast. And if somebody wants to get into 8K, you're talking about 4 times that amount of data. So, yeah. And Miller Media NDI is pretty cool for getting graphics from a computer to another. That's basically it. And I also find it that's probably useful for PTZ cameras. So you run a single cable to a camera, and then you get video, camera control, and power over a single cable. That's pretty nifty. But really only worth it if you already have a video switcher that supports NDI. So, you know, in case of those of us using Blackmagic, we'd have to get a separate converter to convert from NDI to SDI or HDMI. And all of a sudden, things get more expensive to do that than it is to just go fiber from camera into the switcher. So, yeah. Let's see. Looking good in YK. So nice, cool. I don't understand why someone would pick the cheaper studio camera over the Pocket 4K. You get more of the Pocket. They're different cameras. They're meant for different things. They have a different workflow, different controls. Just a very different animal. So, yeah. Web Presenter versus Hyperdeck. Go watch the video I just posted today about reviewing the Web Presenter. I actually cover that in quite a bit of detail there. So, but basically, the big advantage of the Hyperdeck, but of the Hyperdeck is that it supports bonding, so you can use multiple bandwidth from multiple connections simultaneously, whereas the Web Presenters do not do that. All right, IP video may be a feature where broadcast and IT industries converge, but for now it's extremely expensive. It needs extremely specialized devices, and it's very difficult to troubleshoot problems. I think that's probably a fair statement. So, all right, Douglas, can I get AB key fill SDI outputs on the HDMI input from my computer, HDMI output using ProPresenter or Resolume Arena? No. If you're going to do key and fill, you need a piece of hardware that's specifically made to do that. So, if you're working on a laptop, that basically means you're looking at the Ultra Studio Mini 4K. That will do it. That will get you separate key and fill. If you're on a desktop computer, you can get one of the DeckLink cards that has multiple SDI outputs, but you're not going to be able to get that on HDMI. See, the key and fill are actually 2 separate video signals. The fill is your picture, and then the key is the transparency information, and those are 2 separate images. So if you want to be able to do separate fill and key, you need to be able to have 2 synchronized, fully synchronized outputs, which means dedicated, purpose-built hardware in order to do that. So, let's see. Hey, Doug, how are you doing? I'm good. Staying really busy right now. So in addition to all my other normal work, I'm in the process of trying to buy a house, too. So got a lot going on in this crazy, crazy, crazy market here. So I placed an offer on a house over the weekend with 2 days left before they stopped accepting offers. They already had 25, and mine was not accepted, even though I actually my offer was $56,000 over asking price, and I was not the best offer, not the one they took. So. I can see the studio cameras being used in small studio setups with limited zoom and focus. Maybe, but the fact that there aren't that many high-quality lenses for Micro Four Thirds either, so yeah. Won't scaling on inputs adds latency? Yes, it will if you need it, but if you're having to scale anyway, you're going to have that latency no matter what. So it's always best to make sure that your cameras are outputting the same video format as your switchers are expecting, the same format that they're set to internally. In that case, you'll avoid the scaling, but it's nice to have the option to do scaling when it's needed. So if you got a computer where you can't control the resolution and frame rate like a Mac, it's really nice to have that scaling capability. So would love a video on what Micro Four Thirds lenses have electronic focus and zoom. That'd be kind of a short video. There aren't very many of them. So, yeah, and there's a handful from Olympus. I know of 3 from Olympus, but again, they're getting out of the market, and I'm not aware of any besides that. There probably are some. I'm just not aware of them. So, I don't see the point in streaming 4K. Where presenter with HD was more than enough. Don't understand Blackmagic priorities. Well, 4K is going to be the future. You know, I'm streaming in 4K here, and all the videos that I've been streaming on this channel for at least the last 6 months, I've been streaming in 4K. And it just gives you a lot higher quality video signal for those who have the bandwidth and those who are watching on televisions or tablets that have a high resolution screen. You just get a lot higher quality video. And moving forward, we're also going to see HDR at some point too. They didn't say anything about HDR with this new Web Presenter. They will. interestingly, the monitor screen will tell you what color space your video is in. So if you're giving it HDR and Rec 2020, it would show that on screen. But I don't know what it does with it beyond that. I'm gonna have to get my hands on one and actually try that out and find out for sure. It'd be really cool to be able to stream live in HDR with one of those in addition to 4K. So. The TV studio line badly needs some upgrades to at least match the A10 Mini Extreme capabilities. Kind of expected to see that today. A lot of people were expecting to see an upgrade to the television studio and then their production studio, broadcast studio switchers, but they're not doing it. So I don't know why. I don't know what their thinking is. I would love to see that happen. Some speculation that it's going to happen in October at NAB, but we really don't know. It's completely just speculation at this point. We don't really have we don't have any information on what that's going to be, when that's going to be. So BM does do some odd stuff. The Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 6K Pro only outputs 1080p via HDMI. Just confusing. Would expect it to be at least 4K at least and have SDI port, but oh well. Yeah, those Pocket Cinema cameras only output HD on the HDMI. You can't do 4K or 6K or whatever. But they're not made for live use, so it's not super surprising. Those outputs are made for viewing your video on a larger monitor. They intend for you to do recording internally, and then just use a small monitor on the HDMI output in order to give you a bigger display. That's all the HDMI there is meant for. So these studio cameras are a test bed for the later released Ursa Broadcast version 2, just like they did before. Well, maybe we'll see. Hopefully they'll be able to upgrade some of the, if they do that, be able to fix some of the issues with the Ursa Broadcast, like low light capability. So should I get the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera or a new Blackmagic Studio Camera in your opinion? It depends on what you're doing. If you're shooting like a film style workflow, go with the Pocket Cinema. If you're doing live, consider the studio camera, but also consider camcorders. You can get some pretty nice camcorders in that same price range, which already include the lens. Like the Sony has a 4K consumer camcorder that's about $1,700, $1,800. It has amazing quality, and it's smaller, lighter, yeah. So, but it depends on what you're trying to do. They're very different animals. They don't really compete with one another. They have different use cases, different purposes. They're just different products altogether. I for one like Micro Four Thirds with a speed boosted EF. You can have any lens you want. Well, yes, that's true, but you're also probably not going to be getting proper zoom controls with those. There are a handful of EF zoom lenses, but EF is really designed as a format for photographers and some degree some cinema use, but very few lenses in EF are meant for broadcast for live use. So. Yeah. How do you build a studio camera where the monitor does not tilt? One more product from Blackmagic that does not compete. It'd certainly be ideal to have a tilting monitor, but not necessarily a deal breaker. So there's a lot of situations where I'm shooting where a non-moving monitor would be fine. So yeah, it'd be nice feature, but not something that I would consider absolutely essential. Where's the Micro Studio Camera 4K Generation 2 with better dynamic range and low light capabilities? I don't know if that's a priority for them. I don't think that original camera sold very well. I've got one here. I've never cared for it. The image on it is noisy and soft and it needs at least this much light in order to produce a halfway usable image. So, yeah. Ursa Broadcast camera, when you add all the accessories, the price increases a lot, comparable to JVC camera chain. Yeah, that's the big problem with a lot of that workflow. It's like you're talking about big dollars for all of the different components that you need. And I know that the Blackmagic's trying to offer a more affordable option in place of that, but I don't think that Micro Four Thirds is the way to do that. I think they would have been better off with pretty much any other lens format. So, yeah. Not sure NewTek would license NDI to BMD. I bet they would if Blackmagic paid them money. So unless there's some deep hate for Blackmagic within NewTek, I don't know. But I think anybody who comes along with money would be able to license the NDI if they wanted to. Dante AV would be a cool addition to the 10 gig port. Yes, it would, but it requires dedicated purpose-built hardware. You know, Audinate builds the hardware that actually communicates with the network. So you feed, at least with the Dante audio, you feed digital audio signal into it, and it does all the hard work for you. I assume they're probably doing the same thing with Dante AV, although I think the device itself is responsible for doing the encoding, and then the Dante AV chip is just the transport. But yeah, it would have been interesting, but it does require dedicated hardware. It's not something they could add with a firmware upgrade later on. Ethernet cable used in the demonstration was much longer than 20 meters. I think it probably was right at 20 meters, honestly. I have some cables that are about that long, and the bundles look about the same size. So, yeah. Some things seemed rushed. Yeah, maybe. Yeah. I think that's kind of typical of Blackmagic, though. They introduce products before they're really 100% ready to go, and then it takes a firmware update or two in order for them to really reach their potential. So. Let's see. Maybe Blackmagic will work with an existing Micro Four Thirds lens manufacturer to make a better series of lens for studio camera. Never say never. Yeah, we don't know. And some couple of lenses here mentioned. So Panasonic, and then an Olympus. Yeah. When I started live production with studio cameras, the first lens I bought was the exact lens they showed today. And due to the non-fixed iris, I fastly changed to B4. Yeah, that's another thing. Yeah, a lot of these lenses, that they don't have a fixed iris when you zoom in and out, so your image gets darker and brighter as you're zooming in and out. So that's another limitation. A lot of the photo style lenses. So the lens is not specifically made for broadcast. It'd be nice if Blackmagic can upgrade the old silver ATEM camera converter and to a new line in 4K. I've been asking for that for 5 years, and I really don't think that's going to be happening. They have their higher-end studio converter and camera converter products that use SMPTE fiber. I think that's what they really want people like you and me that are shooting in 4K to use instead. But, yeah. Can you make a macro that turns mic 1 on and mic 2 off and vice versa? Yes, you absolutely can do that. So, yeah, that's just part of the macro functionality. So just set your ATEM software control to record and click the buttons to do that, and it will record those steps. So, yeah. I still run SDI and Ethernet to my PTZs, SDI for video, Ethernet for control, NDI just saturates my network. That NDI, you're not really going to be able to get more than 4 or 5 cameras on a single Ethernet network, or 1 gig Ethernet network anyway. So yeah, if you're running more cameras than that, you're having to run separate cables anyway. So yeah, let's see. I've used NDI to do college sports on a campus that wasn't wired for fiber or SMPTE in certain venues, not perfect but functional. That's kind of the gist of it, you know. It can work, but it's got some limitations. So, Hyperdeck transport wheel looks awesome. Can't wait to test it. I find it focused. They're putting so much effort into that. Yeah. The B4 mount is not that common. EF and Sony E mount are more easily found. Well, if in the photography world, yes, but in video, B4 is far more prominent. And B4 is the standard mount for all your broadcast cameras. So you step into a video studio, and that's what they're using. They're using B4. You know, the big zoom lenses you see at sporting events, those are B4. So B4 is far more common for video than EF and E mount. So. The solution for long distances in 4K plus is to convert using microconverters, but these will bring up towing controls. Yeah, so if you are using the new microconverter 3G version, the newest one that just came out last year. Those will transport the camera control and tally information. So, yeah. Why are my scopes flickering behind me? I don't know. I haven't looked into that yet. They've done that a little bit recently, so. I see you're streaming in 1080p, not 4K. I'd assume YouTube doesn't support. I am streaming in 4K. You just need to change the setting on. You need to make sure you have enough bandwidth first of all. But I am streaming in 4K, so I'm sending a 4K signal to YouTube, and anybody who has the right bandwidth and the right device can watch in 4K today. So I know there are some people that are actually watching in 4K. So I think all cameras should have at least some internal storage. 60 gig would be fine, just to get out of the worst case scenarios where your other media dies. It'd be nice, but very often unnecessary, so an expense they probably won't justify. Not necessarily going to want to justify the cost to add that if it's not needed. So, is there anything that immediately jumps out to you that would change about your current trailer, current thoughts? Well, I mean, I'm always making changes. Probably the biggest one I would do would be more connections, more places. Like I'm always running out of power jacks, power plugs, receptacles. They're always all completely full, so I've got power strips everywhere. I wish I would have done more of those. And I should have done some that have USB, because I end up having to power a fair number of devices via USB, including like charging people's phones and whatnot. The biggest thing I would probably change, for me personally, is I would have done a better layout for shooting these YouTube videos. That's something I didn't even think about when I was coming up with the trailer design. But that might be a moot point here before too long. When as I mentioned earlier, I'm currently searching for a house. And one of the things that it's not on my must-have, but on my would-like-to-have list is a place to actually be shooting my YouTube videos in my home, a purpose-built space for that. So shooting the trailer works, but this time of year, when it's hot outside, I have to run the air conditioner, which makes it noisy, and I also have to turn the AC on 4 to 5 hours before I want to shoot. I have to use directional microphones like this and get close in order to make sure that you're not hearing too much of the air conditioner. So just a lot of compromises that I don't necessarily like to make. But anyway, so yeah. What should you use when you want shallow depth of field but ENG style zoom focus controls? Those are kind of conflicting goals. Shallow depth of field is something you generally don't want when you're doing live work, because you can't predict where your subjects that you're shooting are going to be. So trying to get critical focus in a live production environment is difficult. So yeah, you typically don't find shallow depth of field and ENG style zoom focus controls. So you could do one of these studio cameras with Metabone speed booster, but then your selection lenses is still going to be very limited. So still no power switch on some of the Hyperdeck and web presenters. You won't find power switches on most professional equipment. It's designed to be either left on all the time. The downside to having a power switch is somebody can accidentally flip it off, and you generally don't want that happening in a live environment. So you won't find power switches on most professional broadcast gear. So you think they're going to update the 2ME Studio 4K soon? We don't know. We really don't know. It's complete speculation on anybody's part. So Ethernet port in new Blackmagic can use for NDI without Studio Converter? No. It's not an NDI protocol. We're pretty darn sure of that. We don't know specifically what it is, but I can almost guarantee that it's not going to be NDI. Cheapest B4 HD lens is around 5K for Fujinon. Expensive, but much more useful than any Micro Four Thirds alternatives. Yes, that's true for new. One of the nice things about B4 is that since it's been around for forever, the selection of used lenses is pretty good. You can actually pick up a pretty decent used lens, certainly better than most Micro Four Thirds for pretty inexpensively. You can pick them up pretty inexpensively. So you just go on to eBay or whatever. You can pick up B4 lenses for pretty cheap. So you don't have to spend a ton of money in order to get the B4 lens. So I'm interested in live sporting events and wondered what you recommend for an effective replay solution for Blackmagic, or should I look elsewhere? vMix replay, it would be the option that I would recommend. So it costs you a little bit to build a computer, but that's actually the cheapest option that I can think of that gives you multiple camera replay. If you want single camera and you want something super, super inexpensive, Data Video has a replay product that sells for, I think, $1,100, but it's only single camera, and you only get a 12-second buffer. So yeah, there's limitations, but the cheapest solution that has real capabilities with multiple cameras is vMix Replay. You get yourself a Decklink 8K Pro card to give yourself 4 inputs and or 4 outputs. Maybe a couple of cards if you want to be able to record and play four cameras simultaneously. So disappointed there are not any updates for rack mount switchers that adopt mini system updates. Yeah, we all were. You know, we've all been expecting that's going to happen. I think NAB this year in October is probably our best shot at that, but if we don't see anything there, I bet it's going to be a while yet. It's unfortunate, but the kind of situation that we're in. So I suspect the 10 gig Ethernet in the camera is using the same protocol as the fiber on the Ursa broadcast fiber link. There's a pretty good chance of it. Why reinvent the wheel, right? But yeah, I don't know. Do you happen to know the bandwidth of that fiber link? I mean, fiber you get a ton of bandwidth. Are they multiplexing or are they compressing? I don't know. I've never looked into that. So watching in 4K looks great. Yeah, so there's at least one viewer in 4K right there. So there you go. Safari doesn't support 4K unless you're on Big Sur. You'd have to have the right browser, the right internet connection, be in the right region of the world. There you go. And phone doesn't show 4K as an option. I don't know that they support 4K on phones. I think you probably have to be on a television or a desktop computer in order to get the 4K option. What's your take on SRT when working with Blackmagic for remote switching and broadcasting? SRT can be a decent option. If you need low latency, SRT is probably not your best choice. You might want to go with WebRTC. But SRT can produce very high quality video with relatively low latency. So, how satisfied are you with the biodynamic intercom headset on the wall? What do you think about the design? Why is it so retro? Well, it's so retro because it's classic and been around for decades. I don't think necessarily want to. They have other models. If you don't like the retro look, they have other models you can get. But they work. They've worked for forever. So they kind of stick with it. You know, why fix what's not broken? But in terms of what I think of it, they work well. Noise isolation is better on those than some of the other headsets that I have. Sound quality is good enough, not necessarily amazing, but it does work. But they're also really rugged, so they hold up to a lot of abuse. So that's why you buy with one of those. So. HD over 1 gig is interesting. How is discoverability via switches for Tico using? I'm gonna have to defer to someone else in the chat. I haven't used that, so I don't know. So. Hey Spencer, good for you to join us. Always good to have you there. So Spencer's a friend of mine. He helps us run cameras time to time. And have you done audio for us? He actually runs audio quite a bit with his job. So probably to have him do that for us one of these days. So. Once you enter the Blackmagic ecosystem, it is difficult to get out, and you end up investing a lot of money. That's true of any, but the Blackmagic ecosystem is far less expensive than most of the alternatives. So, you know, people who are starting out, it's a great entry, and they offer higher end stuff too. You know, I don't know that if I was building a broadcast studio that I'd go with Blackmagic equipment necessarily, but for those of us who have realistic budgets, Blackmagic stuff can be a good option. They say anything about using the Web Representative Ultra HD with tethering? 5G is available here, so I guess that's an option. Well, it has the same tethering options that they've had with the older HD models, so you can plug a phone in with USB-C. Either a phone, I guess I don't have it handy, but I've got these little USB LTE modems. excuse me, got these USB LTE modems, and they work just fine with those devices. So. Heard some SD-B4 lenses resolve at HD. Do you know if this is true? Well, it depends on the lens. Yeah, some do. Some won't. I think you'll still get a better image from those older SD lenses than you will from most of the Micro Four Thirds lenses that have the zoom capability. Most of those lenses that have the electronic zoom, they're not very good. Very, very soft. Very low detail. So. What camera lens combo do you recommend for low light, late night production? 2/3 sensors are so small compared to Super 35 or full frame. That's true. I've had really good luck with my Sony PXW Z150, my Z90, and my X70s. They've worked pretty well for that. That's a 1-inch sensor, so it's bigger than the 2/3. They do pretty well in low light. So yeah, I'm able to boost those cameras up to plus 18 dB before they really start to show that much noise. And they will go up to plus 33 if you need to, although that is really, really noise. So, yeah. And watching YouTube, 4K YouTube on my phone all the time. For pre-recorded videos, yes. YouTube has additional restrictions for live streaming. So the live streaming capabilities are quite different than watching a pre-recorded video. And for anybody watching this after the fact, after YouTube goes through and does their processing on the video, you'll be able to watch on 4K on your phone. But for live streaming, there are some restrictions there. So it depends. There's a lot of variability in who can watch in 4K. But so yeah, actually that means I'm caught up, and they're essentially caught up. So. Are you recording multi-channel audio when doing an event for post-production? When we do audio, yes, but for most events where audio is critical, where somebody else, whoever we're working for, our client, has hired a separate audio production company, and it's up to them whether they do multi-channel audio or not. Like, we did a pretty significant concert a couple of years ago, a fairly big name. And they just used the house audio guy, and he didn't record anything. He didn't even record the stereo mix. So left it up to us in order to record that. So in that case, I recorded the stereo mix, and then I recorded the audience mic separately. So, yeah. If there's lots of noise in the image because of low light, does 4K matter? Well, you got to decide, you know. You're still getting more resolution, more detail in the image, even if it's noisier. So you have to decide what's more important to you. Is it important to have a clean image or having additional detail? So it just depends on the event you're doing, and yeah. The problem, as always, is that people expect Grass Valley class products with BMD prices. Realistic expectations will make life easier. Yeah, that's always true. You know, no matter what you're buying, whether video or anything else in life, you know, you're not going to expect Toyota Prius to perform the same way as a Ferrari. You know, so it's different levels of functionality and reliability and whatnot at different prices depending on what's your level of tolerance, what's your budget. What capabilities do you need? It's nice to have a variety, and we should be glad that we even have options of getting into switchers that are capable of doing professional quality video for under $1,000. In the case of the A10 Mini, well under $1,000. So, it's something we didn't have a few years ago. I mean, I remember first time I saw an HD switcher for under $1,000, and it was jaw-dropping. It was when Blackmagic released their original television studio. I don't know, that was like 10 years ago or something like that, and that just was that set the industry on its head a little bit. So all of a sudden, people could produce HD video and be able to switch between multiple cameras for an affordable price. And yeah, so has anyone counted the times that the Blackmagic presenter has said that the machine was oriented the other way around? Yeah, I don't know. All right. Does the analog SDI BM converter work well? I have 2 or 3 devices in a composite feed environment. They work. They work okay. They're doing kind of a it's not a super high quality scaling. It's okay. You're going to see things like aliasing going on with those. If you want really high quality, you'd probably want to put a high quality scaler in front of it, something like a Teranex AV or Teranex Express to convert from HD down to SD, and then put the analog SDI. I'm sorry, the other way. You're going the other way. Sorry, I misinterpreted there. So analog to SDI, they work okay, but you're getting an SD signal out the back. So converting that way is fairly easy to do. Going the other way, like converting HD to analog, HD SDI just to analog is a little harder to do. But if you just need to take an analog signal and get it into an SDI, those products work fine. Yeah. Thanks, Spencer, for posting links. Yeah. All right. What do you think about Blackmagic use USB-C everywhere? Does it make things simpler or more complicated for you? It's just an additional capability. It doesn't affect anything else. They're not taking something away in order to add that. So, just a nice bonus to have that on there. So, just noticed Blackmagic is pushing electronic focus controller with a new studio camera. How do you think this will operate compared to old analog focus whip? That's going to depend entirely on the lens and how granular its electronic control is. So it should be accurate. I don't know that it's going to be fast and responsive. Those lenses tend to not be super responsive and responding to focus commands. So I prefer those USB-C on the front. Some of them actually do have the USB-C on the front. Like the web presenters have USB-C on the front and back. So yeah. I think you do a good job with the YouTube channel. Keep it up. I'm a bit disappointed about no video mixer. You think they saved that for October and the big broadcast? What do you think? We don't know. We really have no idea. There's a good chance of it, but you really don't know. I know for a fact that National Public Television in Madagascar uses Blackmagic video hardware and has a Behringer X32. Yeah. You can use them for that kind of thing. But building a broadcast studio here in the United States, that wouldn't fly. And Blackmagic studio stuff would not fly in a broadcast studio here in the U.S. So, I'm not sure what question he's responding to, but isn't there a processing delay to consider when directed towards a large live screen? It's IMAG, basically. Has this been resolved with a higher performing computer system? Do you use vMix? So I use vMix for instant replay, and that's it. The way that these software-based switchers work, they're inherently going to have at least 2 additional frames of latency compared to hardware switchers. So if you want the lowest latency possible, like you would probably need an iMag, hardware switchers are really the only way to go. And NewTek quotes their switchers as having an average of 2.5 frames of delay. I'd say they're being a little bit more optimistic than I would be. And essentially what happens, again, I need to do a video about this sometime. Essentially what happens is the capture card grabs the entire frame of video and then it passes that data over to the software. So it can't start processing at all until the entire frame has been received. And then for output, it has to build the entire frame and send that to the output card before it can start outputting it. So hardware switchers, they can actually start outputting video within a few pixels of the time that they come in on the input. So if you have synchronized video sources, you might have latency that's measured in a handful of pixels rather than frames. Just an advantage in the way that they inherently work. So hardware switchers are pretty much always going to have lower latency than anything based on software like vMix or the TriCast or whatever. So if you're doing iMag, I would stay away from software-based switchers and just go straight to hardware. But if you're just doing strictly live streaming, it doesn't matter. No one's going to see those additional 2 to 3 frames of latency. It just doesn't matter for that kind of environment. But if you're doing iMag, I would definitely steer you towards doing hardware switchers. What do you think of Ross Carbonite small vision mixers compared to the Blackmagic similar offerings? Well, the Ross stuff is more expensive and probably lacking some functionality in some areas on the lower end products. But certainly the Ross stuff is going to be built to be more reliable than any of the Blackmagic stuff. They're built to a higher standard. You know, they're designed to be more robust than anything Blackmagic is producing. Blackmagic is able to produce the stuff at the cost that they do, the prices that they do, because they're not building in the same level of redundancy that you find in higher level equipment. So, you know, if you want something that's going to always work, you probably aren't going to be buying Blackmagic. It's just kind of the way that it is. They're producing a budget product that does a good job at what it does, but maybe not quite as robust as something higher end. So, for anyone wondering if BMD gear is reliable can produce quality productions, look at SpaceX launch streams. They heavily use Blackmagic gear. Yeah, I've noticed that as well. So, but at the same time, they have had some issues too. So, yeah. Doesn't Blackmagic have a rack mount playback unit? Well, all of their Hyperdecks, I don't think that displayed. All of their Hyperdecks actually can be used for playback. So, yeah. So in that way, yes, they do. They do produce devices that are made for playback. But they don't have, as far as they don't have a video server device. I should do a video on what those actually are. Something like an EVS. But they don't have any video server devices. Which allow you to do multiple playbacks simultaneously and multiple recordings simultaneously. So, yeah. Are we... Okay. Doug, what do you think about the HoloLens Stream Mix? It's an interesting product. It's not something I personally would ever use, but for anybody who's just getting started and only needs a handful of video sources, you want something that's small and compact and affordable, it's not a bad way to go. I think some of the other YouTubers who are covering video production stuff have done reviews on that. I think Aaron Parecki has one in his possession at the moment. I don't know if he's produced a review on it just yet. But yes, I know there are some reviews of that pending. So, Blackmagic mini converters are used everywhere. I'm sure they're now at the Olympics too. You find people have strong opinions both directions on that. You'll find some people who won't touch them, and you find other people say, yeah, they're good enough. So you'll find that some people are glad to use them, and other people hate them. So I've encountered people going both ways on that. All right. Do you know of any official BMD online shopping store which delivers worldwide? Well, I think B&H will deliver worldwide, won't they? But yeah, I don't know of any worldwide distributor so. Studio camera 4K is currently used at the Olympics. We saw one shot of one, but at the same time they're not using those cameras for their main cameras. They're relying more on Sony gear for that. Sony has really kind of taken over broadcast for professional cameras for the last couple of decades. You used to see a lot more cameras from other manufacturers, Panasonic, Hitachi. The names of some of the other ones are escaping me at the moment, but yeah, there used to be a lot more of a mix in professional broadcast cameras. These days, Sony dominates big time. So, I would love a video hub with Dante interface. Well, a lot of us would. I would love anything Dante that has SDI that's affordable, SDI to Dante converter. But there's only one product that I'm aware of, and it's pretty expensive. So, have you had a chance to work with the Ultimat? Is it any better than standard software keying? Well, Ultimat is keying in real time. There aren't a lot of devices that can do that as well in real time. I suspect that software solutions are probably better, but they're not working in real time. So, yeah. Notice you have X keys on your desk. You also use an Elgato Stream Deck within your production process. Stream Deck XL right there. But I did a video a couple weeks ago about why that is not a part of my production workflow anymore. I've had that software crash on me too many times and create some really bad situations that when I'm working for paying customers, I do not include Companion in my work process. So I use X keys primarily with the Just Macro software. I find it is, even though it's not 100% reliable, it is far, far, far more reliable than Companion is. So, and just as a follow-up to that, I was going to do a video for my paying Patreon, and YouTube members, subscribers. But I did a lot more research into Companion after I did that video, and I've discovered a lot more, and it has not been favorable for Companion. I'll say that. So I mean, I actually took time to look at the source code on. Yeah. So I think anybody who watches this channel regularly knows that I am a software developer. That has been my main job for the last 40 years, 35 years. So I understand software really well, and I've had to produce a lot of really robust software. You know, in the late 90s, I was selling backup software, and I was selling it to some very high-profile clients, and that had to be 100% reliable. And then the other big product that I did was software that runs the third largest pizza chain in the world. That can't go down. Otherwise, they can't take orders. You know, you get very upset customers when they walk into a store and they can't sell you a product. So that had to be super reliable. And then I'm currently working on some stuff in the biopharma industry that's interfacing with hardware that's $250,000, and that can't fail. So I understand pretty well what it takes to write robust software. And a lot of the techniques that you use in order to write software that's going to just work and not fail, they're not employed in Companion. They just don't exist. They're just not in there. So having reviewed the code myself with my own two eyes, I can say with a lot more confidence now that software was not designed to be robust. So if you're looking for something that's going to be reliable and something you can trust, I would not be looking at Companion. It was not designed that way. The code was not written that way. So yeah, if you want reliable, that's not a product that I would recommend. So. I still see Ikegami cameras on some trucks, but never NEP. Yeah, Ikegami still is. They still have a presence, but Sony has really dominated that world. So, what's the purpose of SDI in on the Blackmagic Studio camera? Does Tally Light work without SDI in? No, Tally would not. So the SDI in is used to convey Tally, camera control, intercom information. So if you're using the built-in intercom, or you want Tally, or you want to be able to control the cameras remotely, you have to have the SDI in coming from an SDI output on your switcher. A lot of cameras used at the Olympics is Panasonic AK UC4000 4K. Yeah, and Panasonic still makes good cameras. There's no question about it. But generally speaking, across the professional video world, professional video production world, you find Sony's far more than anything else. So it's not because the other cameras aren't good. It's just Sony's are the dominant force there. So, yeah. Great new products. Now I can use the network switch as a video stage box. Not with the new cameras, no. We don't think it's IP, and even if it was, you wouldn't have enough bandwidth in order to run multiple cameras over a single cable. So, can you control the Sony cameras with Blackmagic stuff through SDI? No. Casper Skarhoy has done some interesting stuff for doing remote control of Sony cameras. So if it's something that you need to have, kind of look at some of his products that he's done. It's not complete control because those cameras were not designed for that. If you want a full proper CCU camera chain, then you're investing in a proper CCU camera chain. And the Blackmagic stuff kind of approximates a lot of that. It gives you a lot of the same functionality, but it does it in a pretty different way. So you can kind of accomplish the same result with Blackmagic, though it is done pretty differently. So the computer's going to sleep here. But yeah, you're not going to find control of the Sony camcorders, the small consumer size Sony camcorders through SDI. If you want to do some control, look at the Skarhoy stuff. Yeah. A lot of Kevin saying, I have a lot of success with Stream Deck and Central Control. It's not that okay, I need to be clear. It's not that those are necessarily bad products like Companion and whatnot, but I can't speak to Central Control. I haven't used it. But in terms of Companion, it's very clear looking at the source code. It was not written to be robust. That was just not a priority. They can tell that looking at the code, their priority was getting a lot of functionality out very quickly. So that's the way the code is written. But they're not doing some very basic stuff that would be considered essential for a robust, hardened piece of software. You know, like data sanity checking. You know, you make sure that data you're getting back from a device is really something that you expect it to be. You know, if you're getting data back from your Blackmagic switcher, you're going to want to make sure that the data coming back is what it's supposed to be, and that data hasn't been corrupted or truncated in transit. And I can give you a very specific example of that. So in that video I did a few weeks ago on Companion, where I complained about its reliability, I showed an error message that I had gotten with it just before I had started recording that day. And it turns out that error message was coming from their Hyperdeck interface module. And one of the developers reached out to me and did some research and found out that they had never tested it against 4K, against a device running in 4K. And so, you know, that's something they hadn't anticipated, they hadn't coded for, and when they encountered that differently formatted data because the video was 4K, it crashed. And a properly hardened piece of software would not freak out when it gets data that it's not expecting. Just one example. But that's, you know, there's a number of things that a developer can do to make software a lot more reliable, and it's not necessarily a criticism, because, you know, they have different design goals than somebody creating a robust system would. But they didn't take the time to do that with Companion. So that's kind of where I'm. That's my point. So it can work in a lot of situations, but it was not written with robustness in mind. So, yeah. Panasonic is an official partner, so they want to use their own gear unless it's an outside contractor who's using Sony. No, Sony cameras. Sony is actually one of the sponsors of the Olympics, so you find a lot of Sony cameras there too. They have both. The world would not survive if the pizza chain software failed. It might cause a civil war. I mean, it's not the end of the world, but it costs companies a lot of money. You know, if you know, a pizza chain can't take orders, they can't take money from their customers, and you have thousands of stores that are down. That's a lot of money. You know, that's millions and millions of dollars in a day. So. Looked at the source code. That can't be okay, right? No reverse engineering. Companion is open source, so anybody can download it. Look at the code. It's on GitHub. So, have you or do you use any PTZ cameras within your productions that you feel they realistically can replace a man with your processes live? So I have a couple of PTZ cameras myself. They're older models at this point. The Sony SRG 300 SE. They're nice for situations where you don't want to put a camera operator somewhere. So if it's going to be too distracting, or it's in a location where a person can't operate comfortably, though, then PTZ are kind of nice. There are some things you give up. So PTZ cameras, the image quality is not as good as an equivalently priced camcorder or professional camera. So you're definitely going to be losing some quality to your image. It's a lot harder to produce. So PTZs can produce a nice smooth motion, but it's harder to react to things that are going on in real time with a PTZ. So the feedback loop from the time you're seeing it to showing it on a monitor to controlling a joystick, it takes longer than it does to just operate a tripod head. So if you got a subject, the shooting is moving around, you're shooting an event where people are moving around, PTZs are not a great way to go. So. But again, they can be nice in situations where it's not a good idea or dangerous to put a camera operator somewhere, or if it's going to be distracting. You know, if you need to stick a camera up front in a venue where there's performance going on, it might be better to do a PTZ instead of having a camera operator that's there that everybody can see and is causing distraction. So. I think the Blackmagic is using generic programmable FPGAs for other equipment, which are cheaper and reprogrammable, but not as efficient as a system-on-a-chip dedicated chips. Yeah, that's true. I don't think you're going to find a whole lot of people doing SoCs in this world. The scale is just not there. So, yeah. Check out the Panasonic AKU C4000. I've used some on site, and they're really good. Yeah, again, I'm not saying that those other cameras are not good, but I'm just saying that in terms of the sheer volume of cameras that are out there for broadcast use, you find Sony more than anything else, by far. They've just become to dominate. It's not necessarily because their other cameras are bad, but yeah, you just find that that Sony cameras are everywhere. So. You really hate Companion. How did you view their source code? It's on GitHub. Anybody can look at it. Most people had bad experience with Just Macros. Well, Just Macros has crashed on me. I'm not saying that it's perfect, but in terms of reliability, the number of crashes I have with Companion is probably 100 to 1, at least 100 to 1 compared to Just Macros. I mean, it's not even close. So, and I think a lot of that is because I'm producing in 4K, and Companion hasn't been tested very thoroughly against 4K. So. Is the Olympics OBS producing the entire international feed in 4K or just HD in some parts in 4K? I don't know that all the details. What I've heard is they're shooting some things in 8K, which is being downscaled to 4K for certain venues or certain events, but a lot of other events are just in HD. So they don't have their entire workflow is not 4K. Keep in mind that this is OBS. They're well. I'll skip that, but yeah. So they're reusing a lot of old equipment, so only doing 8K where they feel they need to. Do you use any BirdDog products? Do you reduce your hardware setup with the integrated features of the BirdDog within a BM set? No, I do not use any BirdDog stuff. So, and that's probably my NDI, and I don't use NDI. So. Have you ever run into a situation where you need internet WAN bonding? If yes, was it with hardware bonder or software based? Well, I very often do for my video encoder. So my Hyperdeck Video Go has bonding capability, and for anything that I'm getting paid, any event that I'm getting paid for, I take advantage of that just for redundancy. So just in case there's a problem with the internet in a venue, I have cellular backup going on as well. But it's so yes, I take advantage of that. But I haven't done anything with bonding for just the generic internet connection here in the trailer. So like most of the time during an event, we're not, other than streaming, we're not using much bandwidth. And so even if I have to use just the cellular that I have here in the trailer, 4G LTE cellular, that's been fine. So. Is Blackmagic the only company that's using SDI ancillary data to transmit tally and intercom? I haven't seen other brands that the same. I'm not aware of any either. It doesn't mean they don't exist, but I haven't seen it. So, yeah. It's entirely possible that somebody else has, but, yeah. By the way, thanks, Spencer, for pulling all these videos out. That's very helpful. I mean, I could certainly do that myself, but it's distracting, and it's nice to have somebody doing that, so I appreciate that, Spencer. Appreciate what you're doing there. So, is there a way using an A10 Mini Extreme in this case as a capture card only mode? Well, yeah. You just plug your video input into one of the inputs, set that as the active input, and then use the USB output to connect to a computer. So it's an expensive way to go, but you can do it. It would work just fine. I know a lot of the people that are on the Office Hours podcast or show are doing that. So, yeah. So, Stefan, my opinion on the Blackmagic Live production releases. All Hyperdeck specs look great, but poor that none of them got XLR audio output. Sucks. All new Blackmagic Studio camera is the best thing since the Constellation. It's interesting that you like the studio cameras, because most of us here that are watching here today, are kind of thinking that was for a little bit short-sighted of them to go with Micro Four Thirds on cameras coming out today. In terms of the Hyperdecks, yes, it would be really nice to have audio inputs and outputs on those. Not the end of the world because you can add it with an embedder or a de-embedder, but it would have been nice to have that built in. So, yeah. EtherCon would be nice, and B4 camera a control output for using the zoom and focus would be killing it. Yeah, that would have been really nice. It's kind of funny. EtherCon connectors are, in a lot of cases, cheaper than just a generic Ethernet connection. So it's really odd that when somebody is building a product that's designed to have robust connections and they don't use EtherCon. I mean, I use EtherCon exclusively here in my trailer. So, I mean, they're, aside from the inexpensive Keystone Ethernet connections, they're actually pretty inexpensive. So, yeah, but having that additional level of protection. Hoping the WebSense 4K firmware update will fix the issues with buffering on the HD. I haven't seen those issues myself. generally speaking, the only time you'd see buffering is when you have an internet connection that's not reliable. So, yeah, you might check to see if you can stream at the same kind of bit rates using something like OBS or another video encoder. I suspect you have something going on with your connection. So, did Blackmagic ever bring you some free stuff to test out? No, I've never gotten any products for free from Blackmagic for testing. They've replaced a couple of products that I've got that died or malfunctioning, but I've never gotten any free products for testing. I've worked with their PR people a little bit here and there, but I at one point asked them to send me an advanced panel, but they didn't have any, and that would have been on loan instead of a free product. So. Yeah, someone else thanking Spencer for finding those videos. So that's very, very helpful. I'm very grateful to you, Spencer, for doing that. So I've done a lot of videos on a lot of these things you guys are asking me about. So it's nice to have somebody bringing up those links. So, yeah. So sensor is bigger on the new studio cameras. So as far as I know, B4 converters aren't viable. That's entirely possible. I haven't looked at the specs on those, but if it is bigger, then yeah, B4 converter may not be something that we can get away with. There's a 62-page document about the broadcast installation on OBS's site. I'd be interested to read that. You have to, if you can find that and link, that'd be appreciated. I'm sure a lot of people here in the chat would like to take a look at that. So, I mean, that'd be kind of a dream to be able to take a tour of what they're doing there. So, I mean, I know they're high tech, but they're not as high tech as I think people think that they are. There's a lot of certainly a ton of technology in there, but the fact that they can't produce 4K across the board lets you know that they're cutting some corners in order to save some money here and there. So, I think this StudioCam Pro uses Ethernet. Well, yeah, it is Ethernet, yes. In the official stream, we mentioned they can fall back to 1 gigabit if the cable does not work with 10 gigabit. Bandwidth is no problem with Unify LEAV switch. Okay, yeah. He said in HD that they could run at 1 gigabit. I don't know that will work with 4K though. Requires switching still, right? All 4 or 8 inputs are not available to the computer at the same type over USB-C. Yeah, the USB-C on those is only for the program output. You're not getting individual feeds for all of your different camera inputs. So if you need to record each feed individually, you're going to want a different solution. 4 separate capture cards. And you can get USB or HDMI capture cards off of Amazon for $15 or $20 a piece. So if you're just doing capture, just get a pile of those. It's going to be cheaper than an ATEM Mini anyway. So. Recently, I used a gold-plated, robust 25-meter HDMI cable with a camera and an Elgato capture card. Got the image just fine. However, there was noise on the image like sugar. Cable or dirty HDMI jack. You're probably just trying to push it too far. That sounds like you're experiencing data corruption in transit. It's not able to convey the data properly from the camera to your capture device. So, and if you need to go that far, I would switch out and use an optical HDMI cable or convert to SDI for that cable run. Optical is going to be the cheaper way to go, but yeah, HDMI was never meant to go that far. So if you get it to work, you're lucky, and at some point it's going to fail. So. About the cameras, yeah, MST is not great, but for $1,800 for camera, it's cheaper. We are using older models since years, and we're hoping for an update. Nobody needs big sensors for this purpose. Big sensors is not the point. You know, B4 cameras have smaller sensors. You know, 2/3 inch or 1/3 inch or even 1/2 inch. Those are smaller than a micro 4/3. So, you know, you're kind of, when you go with that camera, you're going with a bigger sensor anyway. But yeah, it's just an odd choice. You know, I would have preferred to see a B4 mount, because you can pick up old B4 lenses for a song. So. The ATEM Mini outputs kind of coded signal as I have to work with a webcam emulator. A signal from Shuttle or Thunderbolt or any PCI Blackmagic video card will have better quality. Well, that's true. I mean, that's going to be. I mean, if you want full quality and not go through compression, then you're going to be looking at something like a DeckLink or an Ultra Studio, because everything else compresses. Even those inexpensive HDMI capture, they're compressing. They're compressing the signal. So, let's hope Blackmagic fixes quality control in their MIDI converters. They break down easily, and hope they replace the USB power to a proper DC connector. Well, in the past, they've actually used DC. It's only been used recently. They've started putting USB-C on a lot of those things. But the MIDI converters, the big issue I see with those is they don't handle heat very well. And the HDMI, in order to work reliably, you have to have good quality cables. So if you got good quality cables and you provide adequate cooling for them, they tend to work all right. So I'm using a ton of them. I mean, this camera that you're watching right here is going through one right now. The cameras that I use only, if you want 4K, they only output it on HDMI. So I've got the HDMI output of this camera going into a Blackmagic mini converter and then converting to SDI. So have you used the AJ Kumo SDI router product with Blackmagic or ATEM? I was looking at 32 by 32 product. I haven't personally used it, but there's no reason it shouldn't work. It's just SDI. So one thing to watch out for if you're doing 3 gig SDI, make sure that it supports level B, 3 gig level B, because that's what Blackmagic uses. So there was a 1-hour video on 2016 Rio OBS. That was cool. I've seen that one. That is pretty cool. Yeah. There you go. I've stopped using mini BMD converters to AJA and decimator design. And the AJA and decimator are more reliable. There's no question about that. So if you need ultimate reliability, then those are going to be a better choice. But, for example, here, taking the 4K signal out of my Sony camera, HDMI to go to SDI, I'm looking at the $495 12G cross in order to make that conversion instead of $145 or $145 for the Blackmagic product. So I can buy 3 of the Blackmagic for the price of 1 decimator. So when they work, it's a good option. So if you're in a situation where the Blackmagic work fine, then it can make a lot of sense. So. Oh, Spencer found the document. Awesome. So I'll take a look at that later. So obs.tv/news/797. Awesome. Yep. Okay, we're getting close to 2 hours, so I'm gonna start wrapping this up a little bit. So let's take the remaining questions that are here. Let's see. You're gonna record Blackmagic RAW on a USB drive with 1800K camera. That's incredible. That's true. Yeah, but Blackmagic RAW doesn't do any good for you in a live environment. It's only for editing after the fact. So if you're not editing your videos after the fact, then kind of a useless feature. Use SDI if ever possible. HDMI designed for consumer usage, DVD player to TV, only short distance. That is true. Yeah, HDMI was designed for connecting consumer-grade equipment to a television over short distances. The fact that it's being used for cameras over long distances, you're lucky. You're lucky if it works reliably for you. And at some point, it will fail. Just wear and tear on the cable and the connectors. At some point, it's going to fail on you. SDI. So one of the big problems with HDMI is it's running a ton of different signals at the same time and at high bandwidth. A bunch of signals being run in parallel. The longer you run that cable, the more chance there is for those signals to get out of sync. And that's one of the reasons. And not only that, like the devices that are supplying the signals are not outputting a strong enough signal in order to overcome long distances. So, yeah, I mean, it's hard to do. It's hard to push high bandwidth signals over long distances. And so consumer devices aren't made to do that, and HDMI was not designed with that in mind. So, but SDI is a video signal that was specifically designed for long cable runs, and so you're going to get better results with it. And it's a locking connector too. It's a much simpler connector. You have the outer ground, the shield, and then you have the inner conductor for the signal, and that's it. So there's a lot fewer things to go wrong. and it also has some level of signal redundancy and connection built into it as well. It's not a lot, but it has some. So you're going to find that SDI is just way more reliable when you're doing long runs. So, Jury asking, you use a microconverter for 4K? No, I use a mini converter. So the Blackmagic mini converter. So old B4 lenses are cheap, but there are adapters from MFE to B4, but not the other way around. I think there are some, because I mean you technically have to enlarge the image in order to fill the frame, going from B4 to micro four thirds. It's a smaller image circle. So, but I think they actually do exist. So. Blackmagic used 3-pin XLR for reference on one of the recorders. Wanted to be confusing and or make interconnection a pain. They did that for timecode. Timecode, again, I really need to do a video about this, but timecode is an audio signal. And so it very often is found on XLR connectors because XLR is used for audio. So the fact that some of their smaller ones are using BNC for timecode is they're doing that to save space. It's the same signal, but it's a different impedance, so it needs, if you're going to convert between the two, you need to go through a matching transformer. They're inexpensive and they're easy to get, so it's not that big of a deal. But yeah, they went with the XLR on the rack mount equipment because it is an audio signal and that's what we normally use for audio, and they went with the BNC on the smaller ones in order to save space. So the shading workflow is nice with Blackmagic design. What's your shading workflow with camcorders? For me personally, when I need to, well, the cameras themselves have some controls built in, so I can do that, but I can also apply a lookup table using Blackmagic SDI to HDMI converters. I don't have to use the HDMI output, just send the signal through the converter on SDI input and SDI output in order to apply a LUT. I did a video about that here a few months ago on the channel, so if that's something you want to see, that does exist. But it's not something you're doing in real time, but it is certainly possible. When are you doing your next member stream? I've got questions, and like Radio Shack, you've got answers. That's pretty funny. I have been so incredibly busy that I just haven't had time to do it. But I'll make a point of doing one in August. So anybody who wants to do a private, and we're actually going to do it in the form of a Zoom meeting. It's not necessarily going to be a YouTube video, but yeah, we'll be doing a Zoom meeting for paying members on the channel. So if you've got questions and you need immediate feedback in a little more friendly format than just a chat, then that's the way we're going to be going. So, but I'll make a point of doing one of those in August. All right, we're at 2 hours, so we've got to wrap this up. What's your thoughts on using ATEM and a YOLO box combo? That's fine. You know, ATEM gives you more inputs than you get with a YOLO box. So if you need more than inputs than the YOLO box has, then great. Then you can use the YOLO box for doing your final encoding and whatnot, and streaming if you'd like. So, minis never failed for me. How do they fail? Well, signal become intermittent is probably the biggest thing, but they can also just outright die as well. It doesn't happen a lot. I probably have 80 or 90 mini converters, and I think I've probably only had 3 or 4 that have actually quit working on me. So. Do you think it's safe to invest in a 2ME Studio 4K now, or return on investment going to be a loss? I would probably hold off or buy one used now, so that when you go around and turn to sell it later on, you're not going to be losing quite as much on it. So. I'm with live production 10 years. It's always good to be able to record internal for editing. The old studio cameras with the same price, so you needed at least a Hyperdeck to record. Yeah, that's true. It's nice. It's great to be able to record internally in the camera. But if you're recording raw, that means you have to color it in post in order to make it match your live. So it was a little bit of an odd choice. I think I would have rather seen MPEG-4 recording on the camera rather than Blackmagic RAW. Okay, a lot of questions coming in here, so I'm gonna have to wrap this up. But and thanks everyone for tuning in. Hopefully this has provided some insight into the new products that Blackmagic has just announced. A little bit of perspective instead of just the marketing spin that they tend to have for the live streams. But so anyway, if you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing. I do video production related content here on the channel at least once a week, and I do additional content for those who are paying members and for Patreon contributors as well. So if you want even more than that, you can sign up on one of those programs in order to get even more content than what you're seeing here on the public channel. So, but if you have questions about any of this, you can either leave those in the comment section down below this video, or join us over on Discord. That's djp.li/discord. There is a link in the description for that as well. And there's a huge community, many hundreds of people who work in video that can help out and answer questions there as well, in addition to me being there and regularly answering questions through my channel here. So anyway, so that's gonna do it for now. So thanks everyone for watching, and have a fantastic day.